Great, thank you, Heather, and lovely to see you all this evening. And let's start with a practice and an arriving and see what happens next. So, an invitation, as always, to get as comfortable as can be. And just letting the sound of the bell welcome you into this space. Getting a sense of what's present in your internal environment as we're starting this session. As well as perhaps acknowledging anything around you, the day that has been and the evening perhaps to come. Just finding ourselves here in this moment. And turning to the session ahead, we could begin by reflecting on our intention. The intention for looking at how we teach compassion, the role that compassion might play in our mindfulness practice and teaching, and seeing what's around for you. And when you're ready, feeling into the motivation that underlies your presence here, your intention for teaching. How does it bring benefit to self and others? And in your own time, letting intention and motivation come to rest. And letting your attention now gravitate towards the movement of the breath. And the body that is moved by the breath. A sense of resting here in the midst of all that is present in this moment.
No, you will not.
And into that resting space, let's drop a question for reflection, just noticing what arises in response, whatever form that may come in. How does compassion support my practice of mindfulness? How does compassion support my practice of mindfulness? Noticing feelings or physical sensations, as well as any thoughts, images that might be present. How does compassion support my practice of mindfulness? And when you're ready, just widening around this reflection and coming back to the simplicity of resting with no agenda, nothing to achieve. Simple being. So I'd like to invite you, if you like, to put something in the chat box about what came up in you in response to that question on how compassion supports your mindfulness practice. Just a little gathering of the fruits of that reflection. If you prefer to unmute, you're welcome to do that too. It quietens the self-critic. Yeah. It enables me to be more allowing. And when I'm more allowing, I'm able to connect with the present moment more easily. It deepens it and broadens my awareness. It is the vessel, it holds my practice. It helps me to be kinder to myself. Sometimes it is what I need to support me. I agree. And by doing so, it creates an openness. Yeah. It softens the hard edges. Mindfulness would be dead without compassion. It would not have life. Compassion has become core to my practice in recent times. It really helps me. Mindfulness would be too painful without compassion. I think that's a really interesting one that very much reflects. I can really empathize with that. Yeah. I feel it is really for developing compassion for self and others that one learns mindfulness. Yeah. It allows me to be more accepting of thoughts. I find it difficult to imagine practice without compassion. It really is a foundation of practice. Yeah. I'm very hard on myself and others. Without compassion, I cannot function. None of us can. Yeah. It allows me to come into a mindful space, allows me to stay there when all my faults show up. Yeah. My practice has enabled me to act with my compassion and directly help others in a practical way. Yeah, so just reading those reflections out, really getting a sense of the central place that compassion has in our practice. Yeah, both for self and others. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Kristine. Thank you. And the thought that came up for me was like, it's indispensable, particularly self-compassion. You know, when I see what I do through my mindfulness practice, again, the point about how painful it would be not to have self-compassion to hold that. So I think it's really clear from all that feedback how critical compassion is to our mindfulness practice. And you know, we thought we've not really done this before. We a session specifically on teaching compassion. So what we've done is we've prepared a 2-hour class plan that we'll share with you after this meeting, so that you could deliver a 2-hour class on compassion to your mindfulness groups. And the class plan will go on the membership site with this video, so you'll be able to get the two together after this session, once the video has been edited. So I'm just going to cover a few things, hopefully no more than 10 minutes or so. First is just to give you an overview of the teacher training pathway to teach compassion, and just go over some of the key skills required in teaching compassion, key skills that we need to develop from our compassion practice and from our mindfulness teaching practice. And then I will talk a little bit about the class plan that we've prepared to share. So if you want to train to teach the 8-week compassion-based living course, I say it's 8 weeks, but a bit like the MBLC, it's actually 10 weeks. So it's 8 weeks with an introductory session and a follow-up session. Then you'll need to be teaching mindfulness already, and you will need to have taught 2 8-week MBLC courses. You'll also need to have done the compassion training, so the level 2 responding with compassion course over 3 weekends, or we do it on evenings as well now. And in addition to that, we ask that you've done a little bit more inquiry training. So there's 2 options there. Faye does an excellent online inquiry course. I think some of you have already done this. It's called Revealing Our Mutual Humanity, and the feedback from it has been absolutely excellent. And then I do a weekend each year on inquiry skills for teaching compassion. And that's actually happening at the beginning of February, and I've posted the link for that. So it's a CPD weekend, developing inquiry skills for teaching compassion. But it's also about developing our inquiry skills to hold our course participants when they experience difficult emotions. So then, you know, once those prerequisites have been met, then you can come along and do the 5-day compassion-based living course teaching skills retreat. And I've also posted the link for that in there as well. That's happening in March, I think. It's either, yeah, it's March. Just have a look.
It's the weekend of the 5th of March, Heather.
Yeah. The first week of March, yeah. So, you know, if you've met those prerequisites, you're welcome to come and join that retreat. And it's a similar format to the MBLC retreat, except for 2 main differences. One is that we're going through the compassion-based living course curriculum and teaching it to each other. And the second is there's no assessment on the compassion-based living course retreat. It's just a process of going through and learning how to do it, developing the confidence to teach it through doing it. So that's the teacher training pathway. If there are any questions about that, then if you want to drop them into the chat box or raise a hand. Just looking around the screen. And then, so key skills in teaching compassion. So when we're teaching compassion, we're based on the Dalai Lama's definition of compassion, which is a sensitivity to the suffering of ourselves and others with a deep desire to relieve that suffering or alleviate that suffering. So that definition has got 2 aspects to it. And Paul Gilbert calls it the 2 psychologies, but Choden and I are just in the process of writing a compassion-based living course book. We refer to it more as 2 aspects of compassion. So the 2 aspects of compassion. The one is cultivating a sensitivity to our suffering and the suffering of others, which is very much based in our mindfulness practice, which is very much about turning towards and being with what's difficult. So the practices that we've explored in our mindfulness training, for example, RAIN practice, really support us in cultivating the skills to do this, turning towards, being with, creating the conditions for insight. And then the second aspect is this desire to relieve suffering. And in order to be able to do that, we have this second aspect of compassion, which is about cultivating resources. So, you know, we've already begun that on our mindfulness training by cultivating resources of kindness, for example, cultivating resources of gratitude and appreciation, so resources of joy. So there's these real two aspects to the compassion training: the term being with, which has got like a real sense of being mode, and then the cultivating resources part of the training, which has got more of a doing mode to it. So in the cultivating of resources, very often we're using our imagination, just as we do in the loving kindness practice. Imagine somebody there and saying phrases for them, revel in any felt sense of kindness, curious about any obstacles. So in the compassion training, we're using our imagination and, you know, imagining safe places, compassionate colours, compassionate images, and exploring, imagining flows of compassion between ourselves and them. And again, reveling in any kind of felt sense of compassion or heart opening that happens, but also becoming curious about the blocks. So that's kind of the two aspects or 2 psychologies. And what's important in our practice is that they're in balance, so that we're not spending all our time kind of turning towards and being with what's difficult to the point that we become overwhelmed or depleted. But when also we're not spending all our time cultivating resources and pretending that the difficulties aren't there. So, you know, we need to have this balance of the 2. So we cultivate the resources of joy and kindness and compassion and safeness, embodied safeness, so that we're actually able to turn towards and be with the difficulty. So we balance the two and grow those together. And that's a key focus in the compassion training. I think teaching compassion is more challenging than teaching mindfulness, and there are several reasons for this. One main reason is because that you're asking your course participants to turn towards their own difficulties and to feel vulnerable and often to feel upset. And we need to have trodden this path before them. So we really need to be comfortable with turning towards our own difficulties and being okay with that first, before we're in a position to offer that to support for others. A lot of the compassion work is about seeing previously unseen blocks. And maybe you can recognize from your mindfulness training and engagement in some of the loving kindness practices that often these unseen blocks can be quite painful to recognize that they're actually there. So it requires a much stronger holding of the group. So our own sort of embodiment and a sense of safeness within ourselves and okayness within ourselves needs to be cultivated through our own practice of mindfulness and compassion if we're going to be able to hold the group safely. I think, as I say repeatedly in the mindfulness training, to the extent that we can hold our own difficulties, we'll be able to hold the difficulties of the group. To the extent that we can accept our own difficulties, we'll be able to accept the difficulties of the group. So it is all very much dependent on our own practice. And in my experience, the teaching of compassion, it's working the edge of my teaching practice all the time, you know, which is good, because it improves my ability as a teacher to support my course participants, and also it promotes my own personal growth and what I can hold in my own experience in my own life. I think the other thing that makes compassion a bit more challenging to teach than mindfulness is that the theory is more complicated. So we need to make sure that we understand it kind of thoroughly, both intellectually and experientially. So the evolutionary theories of Professor Paul Gilbert, the self-compassion work of Kristine, understanding the dynamics of the inner self-critic and the compassionate imagery. So there's actually quite a lot of theory there to understand, and then to communicate with clarity. And then what helps us through the teaching of compassion are some of the skills we begin to develop in our mindfulness teaching practice, and particularly teaching in an allowing way. So teaching in a way that allows our participants to have whatever experience they're having without any sense that there's anything wrong. And again, that very much comes from our own practice. Another thing that's really important in our own compassion practice and in our compassion teaching practice is about not getting bogged down in the suffering. So obviously compassion training, you know, calls us to face suffering, our own and others. But if we get too over focused on the suffering and don't have enough resource building, then we can really get bogged down in the suffering. So I think that's probably enough to say as an introduction about advice on teaching compassion. So, I mean, there's no getting away from it. It is more challenging, but with the challenge comes transformation. And if you've seen participants transform when you've been teaching them mindfulness, that's nothing compared to the transformation I've observed from teaching people compassion. So you do get a change in the mindfulness training, but boy, do you get a change in the compassion training. But it's a rockier ride. And so, you know, that's something that you need to be prepared for. Just to notice the question in the chat box, it's possible to do the compassion weekend if you haven't done the compassion retreat, but you would need to do the MBLC retreat first, I think. Or maybe you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't. You could do that think it's probably best to do the mindfulness-based living course retreat first before doing that weekend, Joanna. I would suggest. Okay. Any questions about any of that before I move on? Yes, I would say that participants, I think it's best that people have done an 8-week mindfulness course before they do the CBLC. Yes. And so, you know, you may have, I mean, often when people end a mindfulness-based living course, they'd say, well, what's next? And then what is next? We've got this compassion course that we can teach people. But also there might be a lot of people that have done a MBSR course or an MBCT course or some other courses. It'd probably be worthwhile having a conversation with them to get a sense of the, you know, level of their mindfulness practice first. And we do have a taster session at the beginning of the course, which introduces settling, grounding, resting, and some loving kindness practice. So if people had done a different mindfulness course, you could invite them to that, the taster session, see how they get along with that, and see what you think in terms of taking people on through the sorry, I'm a bit distracted. There's sounds of my dog just throwing up over there, but I think she's okay. I think she's not thrown up yet, so that's good. These things happen, don't they? Okay, so I'm overrunning, so I'm gonna move on. So the taster session that we're sharing the key compassion practice in the level 2 responding with compassion course, which is a practice called self-compassion in SGRS. So here we're drawing on the work of Kristine Neff and Chris Germer, their practice of soft and soothe allow. And we introduce that into the grounding part of the settling, grounding, resting practice. So without further ado, I will hand over to Kristine to guide that practice.
Thank you, Heather, and I hope your dog is okay. Just to acknowledge that my internet all day has been really iffy, coming and going, so I hope it will not go while guiding the practice. If so, then hopefully Heather will be nearby to seamlessly take over. I'm sure she will. But yeah, so the idea was that we wanted to just offer you a very brief kind of 15-minute practice of this settling, grounding, resting support with the softening, soothing, and allowing in the grounding stage. So you may be familiar with it already. Let's get comfortable with it, with how we're sitting or lying, finding a good posture, and seeing what the practice brings today. So our first act of kindness to the body could be to get as comfortable as can be and gravitating towards a posture that holds our intentions, that supports us in this moment. And in your own way, reflecting on intention and motivation for this practice. And then let's find the breath in the body. Approaching it with gentle curiosity, noticing how it flows, where. letting it move towards a soothing breathing rhythm, which may well involve a little deepening, lengthening of the breath, equalizing if that's helpful in this moment. And then shifting the focus a little bit more to the out breath, to the sense of releasing and letting go that is happening in the body with each breath out. Allowing the mind to learn from the body, letting thoughts freely come and go. No need to engage, and in that way beginning to settle. And then letting the breath find its own natural rhythm and beginning to widen around it into the whole of the body. Getting a sense of the sensations that are present, the level of energy, the temperature. The places that are full of sensations and the places that are either quietly neutral or a bit distant or numb. Getting a feel of the landscape within the body. And there might be sensations or parts of the body that feel very well and comfortable, at ease. And there might be a sense of appreciation, a sense of gladness in noticing them. And also perhaps a sense of appreciation for the aliveness. As John Kabat-Zinn so often says, as long as we're breathing, there's more right with us than wrong with us. And at the same time, there may also be some sensations that we experience as difficult, as uneasy, as painful. And in this practice, we could quite deliberately turn towards them, seeing how it is to notice them and to invite a kind of softening around them. Very often a habitual reaction against discomfort is a kind of tightening or hardening. And here we're invited to see how it is to soften. You could even say that word to yourself, imagining a kind of softening around any discomfort. And as well as softening, we could bring an element of soothing, a gesture perhaps of care by placing a hand on the heart or on the part of the body that is in need of that care. Equally, you could meet whatever is there with your warm attention, maybe with kind words. Like you might apply heat to sore muscles, soothing. And again, you could repeat that word soothe to yourself if that feels comfortable. Softening and soothing. And with this sense of care that we're bringing, we could also approach this difficulty with the intention of allowing. The intention of making space for what is here to be as it is. And that may include any feelings of resistance or not wanting. Allow. Allowing. So we're not fighting with what's there. We're not denying it. We're meeting it with care, with softening, with soothing, and allowing it to be. And in time, we could widen our awareness around any discomfort again into the whole of the body. And becoming aware of the sensations of resting, of the body supported by the earth underneath us. And the mind invited to rest in the body. Knowing that nothing is required. That we can soften into being in the midst of whatever is present. if it's helpful to invite a little support into our resting place, and we could land on the breath, on the body, or on sounds. Holding the support very lightly as we continue to rest with whatever is unfolding in our experience, moment by moment. And then as we're coming to the end of the practice, we could cultivate the wish that any goodness will continue to benefit ourselves and also benefit others. So now we're having a moment of sharing there, Heather, in groups. If you've done the magic behind the scene, yeah, there's your invitation. Hello, welcome back, everyone. So we have a little bit of time together for any reflections on how compassion comes into your practice, maybe anything particular of what came into your conversations, what came out of this practice this evening, whatever feels relevant for you. Curious to hear. Shirley, yeah, hi.
I'm a fan of the compassion practices before I go to sleep. I couldn't possibly go to sleep without doing the safe place practice or the golden light openness practice, so I'm quite familiar with them. But just tonight, your practice, Kristine, I'm feeling particularly stressed, and all the physical symptoms that stress bring, like fizzy tummy, tightness, and to soften and soothe and just allow it to be there rather than oh, I shouldn't be feeling like this. Am I going to have a nervous breakdown? You know, to soften and soothe and just allow it. And I was like a chocolate eclair. It was like, oh, yes, just allow it to be there. And there was something else that you said, soften into just being. And it was, I just wanted to go on and on. So yes, it really is the only way to live with any ease at all. And my stress is caused because we move house in 8 weeks, and it's a little bit strange to move during a pandemic, and it's causing me great difficulty, but that really helps. So thank you so much, Kristine.
You're so welcome. It sounds like your compassion practice is really sustaining you in the challenges. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you for sharing that, Shirley. Suruchi, hi.
Hi, thank you. That was beautiful. It is really beautiful to be led into a softening and soothing and allowing practice. Although I've had some meditations on compassion before, but mainly on mindfulness, but I thought, we were discussing with Shirley and Alvina before as well, that I thought how just simply you saying to soften around, and I was focusing on a physical sensation, and how that just reduced the sensation to almost only about 20%, I would say. And the fact that then the thought that comes from that is that quite often we are used to, as soon as we find a problem, to try and find a solution to that problem. But instead, like you said, allowing, that was beautiful, because it made me realize that we don't necessarily have to find solutions, or when we are not able to find solutions, then just softening around it can already reduce the suffering without the solution. So thank you. That's beautiful.
Thank you for articulating that so clearly. And I think this is really what can travel into any practice we offer to people. It's that insight that you're just putting into words of, actually, we don't need to solve, we can give space, we can allow, we can be there with that warmth, with that care, and yeah, that in itself can make a real difference. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. John.
Yeah, hi. I think I'm interested in this tasty session that you're going to post up or to send on, and having a link from the MBLC onto the CBLC, and that stepping stone. So I'm looking forward to seeing that, and because I think for me it'll act like a catalyst or a gentle push, nudge into offering more of the CBLC for past participants and just various others with different backgrounds. So yeah, I'll just say I'm looking forward to that, and thank you as well, because I think it'll be quite helpful.
Yeah, great. So it really acts as a bridge, exactly as you're saying, because it has this practice that's very familiar, the settling, grounding, resting, but then just offering that making explicit that turning towards and the caring, those two different elements of compassion, so that people can get a flavor. And I think something with the word compassion is that it can seem a bit kind of up there, out there. It's like something that I might aspire to kind of by this time I'm a saint, rather than something that actually is really necessary right here in the midst of the mud. So yeah, is that how you're thinking of it, that it might introduce it to people?
Yes, and also a framework for me, or a little crutch for me to lean on and say, like, right, come on folks, this is next.
Okay.
I'm in the same place as everybody else.
Oh, did you go on mute there before you finished, or was that it?
I'm going back into mute.
Okay. Yeah, so it will be there. Heather will post it very soon. Thank you, Jen. Heather, yeah.
Yeah, and we've covered we've covered sort of the new parts of that session as well in this session. So the introduction to compassion in terms of the definition and the two aspects of turning towards and cultivating resources. So that's part of that session, and then this practice that Kristine has just led is part of that session. And then towards the end of the session, we're looking at loving kindness practice, which we know from our mindfulness training. So kind of there's lots that's familiar there, but there's kind of a step forward towards compassion in there too.
I ask Heather, are there any plans to run another insight course?
Yeah, so we've got 2 insight courses happening this year. So Kristine and I are running one over 3 weekends, starting in June or July, I think, isn't it? And then there's one starting later on in the year that I'm running, which is on an evening. So they're on I think they're on the website, Marge.
I was having a look, but not very recently. Okay, thank you.
I'll just have a quick look at Marge, and I'll post the link in the chat box if you like.
Thank you.
And just to acknowledge a question about do we recommend that there's a break between the MBLC to CBLC to consolidate on the mindfulness practice before moving on to the compassion? I'd say it might be an individual thing. For some people, that might be a helpful thing. Also, if there's an opportunity to, if people have a lot of energy and enthusiasm and want to maybe also keep the weekly connection, it may work well to just continue. I don't think we have any particular recommendation other than seeing what's right for you at that time. I mean, for each of the participants. Any other thoughts or reflections before we close this session?
I just put in the chat box, Heather. Have you seen it?
Yes. It can't clash with the MBLC retreat because I'm teaching on both of those.
Would it be possible to do both, or is that doing a lot all at once?
Well, it's like Kristine was just saying. It depends where where you are and how you feel. Yeah, it depends where you are and how you feel about it. People definitely do both, but preparing for the MBLC retreat, we taking ourselves through the 8-week course week by week and doing those practices every day. And then if you've got insight practices on top of that, it depends how much time you have. It's up to you. Yeah. Which isn't very helpful, is it?
It is. Yes. Silly question.
No, not a silly question at all. Thanks, Joanna. Thank you.
Okay. This is us coming to a close this evening then.
Okay, so just to end, let's sit together for a couple of minutes. So beginning by a real sense of appreciation to ourselves for making the time to come together this evening to practice compassion, cultivate our practice and our teaching practice. So a real sense of appreciation and gratitude to ourselves for engaging. And acknowledging any benefit from our practice and sharing together this evening. Acknowledging the benefit that comes from cultivating self-compassion and cultivating compassion for others. Wishing that that benefit will grow for each of us here and go on to be shared with those around us, including those that we teach, in ever widening circles. So thank you, everybody. And we'll try and get this session and the class plan up on the membership site within the next week or so. So go well, everybody, and look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Very much.
Thank
If you
you.
want to
Thank you,
unmute,
Heather, very
please
much.
go.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a good night.
Bye. Do write to
Bye-bye.
us with what else you'd like for CPD sessions.
Thank you. Bye.
Have a good evening.
You too. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.